All right, so Representative Katie Porter from the state of California is back at it again with one of her famous takedowns of corrupt executives within these congressional hearings that she participates in. This time, in the clip that I'm about to show for you guys, she's talking to one of the executive chairmen of the TransDigm defense contracting company, basically calling him out for their brazen corruption and essentially stealing from the U.S. government. So let's just go ahead and watch this clip, and then I'll put it into a little bit more context for you guys.
Do you recognize these words? Quote, "We didn't have to give up a dime. I'm just full of BS." And they took the bait.
I don't have knowledge or recall it.
Okay, that is from a TransDigm exhibit. You don't need to see it, but that is from a TransDigm, that is from an exhibit in this investigation. That is your salespeople talking about a deal that they just made with the military for jet engine parts in 2018. We don't have to give up a dime. Your salesperson said, "I'm just full of BS." And they, being the DOD and taxpayers, took the bait. Mr. Howley, does TransDigm have a code of business ethics and conduct?
Oh, as any company does, of course we do. It's on our website.
Okay, does that code require fair dealing?
Yes. And it says what it says, but of course it requires fair dealing.
Do you think it's fair dealing to be full of bullshit and get the taxpayers to take the bait?
I don't know how to comment on that. I'm not familiar with the situation. I don't know what it is. I don't know who the person is. I don't know them. I just can't comment on it.
Mr. Howley, will you find out who that person is?
I presume you have it. You have an email. I presume you have it. I don't know who it is.
Mr. Howley, as executive chair of the board, being paid $68 million, when a typical board member of a Fortune 100 company receives $319,000. I mean, here is the typical board member of a Fortune 100 company. See this flat line? You can't even see it. Here's you. For $68 million, you need to enforce your company's code of business ethics.
Okay, so I think that was a pretty good takedown there. She does go on and keep pressing him and all of that, and I'll actually link down below in the description if you want to watch the full congressional hearing that was specifically about this TransDigm executive and their corruption. But, you know, I mean, at the end of the day, when she says there that you need to make your company follow your code of ethics, okay, and he says, like, you know, we have this code of ethics, it's real, it exists on our website. Okay, listen, man, if you are an executive working for a defense contracting company that works with the U.S. empire, I'm sorry, but your code of ethics might as well not exist, okay? Because we know exactly what you're profiting from. You are literally profiting by selling weapons, selling equipment to one of the most violent forces that has ever existed in the history of humanity, that then go and use those weapons and that equipment to kill innocent civilians around the world, okay? So, you know, I don't know anything about a code of ethics for this specific company, but I think that in and of itself is pretty much bullshit. And then I'm going to tell you guys about the broader context of how this plays into the overall corrupt nature of the U.S. military in general, because this is not something that is new. This is not something that is unique to this specific guy or this specific company that he happens to run. This is just how the U.S. military operates with our contracts with private companies that produce the weapons and the equipment, like I was just saying, that we use to go and then conduct warfare. Okay, so first of all, what you got to know at a baseline level before we get into some of the other statistics on the Pentagon's corruption and the lack of financial accountability within the Pentagon has literally never passed an audit, okay? And they say some senators want to change that. Okay, so this is from May of 2021. They have literally never passed an audit, and still, even just as of less than a year ago, only some senators want to change that. Okay, so keep in mind, the same motherfuckers who come out here, whether it's, you know, Joe Manchin, Kirsten Sinema, the entirety of the Republican Party, most of corporate Democrats, when they come out here and they make these talking points and they use these talking points about fiscal responsibility, and they say, oh, well, we can't afford a child tax credit, we can't afford universal health care for our people, we can't afford afford to invest adequately in infrastructure because we have to balance the budget, right? We have to keep track of every single cent that we are sending out to the American people. This is what they're doing behind the scenes, okay? Joe Manchin, Kirsten Sinema, the rest of those people that I just included in that list, none of them give a single goddamn shit about fiscal responsibility, okay? This is where the majority of our discretionary budget is going, and they can't even tell us where that money is going, okay? So let me tell you exactly where that money has been going to the best of our knowledge. First of all, understand the context of the US military spending relative to the rest of the world, okay? We can talk about it just in pure numbers of how much we spend. This is a very popular statistic that is often used, but the United States spends more on defense, more like global empire building and warfare, but the United States spends more on defense than the next 11 countries combined, most of which are our allies, okay? You can see here. I mean, think about all the warmongering propaganda that we hear about a war with Russia and a war with China. I mean, their military budgets put together would not even be a fraction of ours, okay? And again, a lot of these are our allies, right? Unfortunately, we're allies with Saudi Arabia, but United Kingdom, Germany, France, Japan, South Korea, Australia, half of these countries are fucking military bases for the United States, okay? So understand, this is what an empire really looks like, okay? And we're not spending this money on anything that is, beneficial to the American people or beneficial to the global population. It's just for defense contractors to get filthy rich, like that executive that Representative Katie Porter was just calling out there, okay? They're basically robbing you blind. They are robbing the government blind to go and, sell weapons to the most violent institution on planet Earth right now in the US military. So understand that context, understand that they can't even tell us where this money is going that they are spending, and then also understand things like this, okay? So this is just from January of 2020, just a couple years ago. The Pentagon's 35 trillion, okay, with a T, $35 trillion accounting black hole. All right, so let's just go ahead and check in with how the Pentagon is operating with their, fiscal responsibility, as Joe Manchin would say. They say, while it shouldn't come as a surprise for an organization that has famously failed to ever pass an audit, like we just said, the Pentagon was nevertheless able to shock some observers this week with a new batch of financial numbers. According to Bloomberg's Anthony Carpaccio, the Department of Defense made $35 trillion in accounting adjustments in 2019, easily surpassing the $30.1 trillion in such adjustments recorded in 2018. And they say that Carpaccio notes that the number dwarfs the $738 billion, now $778 billion under Joe Biden, billion-dollar defense-related funding in the latest U.S. budget, a spending plan that includes the most expensive weapons systems in the world, including the completely failed F-35 jet, as well as the new aircraft carriers, destroyers, and submarines. And it's also larger than the entire U.S. economy and underscores the Department of Defense's continuing difficulty in balancing their books. Accounting errors, okay, that are larger than the entirety of the U.S. economy, okay? How does that sound for fiscal responsibility, okay? So understand, again, they don't even know where the fuck this money is going. They're shoveling it around. They're robbing the American people blind. Basically, the entire existence of the Pentagon in its current form and the entire existence of the U.S. military in its current form is to, allow the U.S. empire to branch out and dominate resource control all around the world, okay? Whether it's in Latin America, whether it's in the Middle East, whether it's in, Southeast Asia, etc. This has been the history of the U.S. military. The entirety of what this operation is a gigantic wealth transfer from the American people and from, the global south around the world that we have gone to war with, whether it's in Iraq, whether it's again in Latin America, etc. The entire history of U.S. imperialism has been a gigantic wealth transfer from the most poor and vulnerable people that live in our society and around the world to defense contractors, essentially. So that's what that $35 trillion accounting black hole is actually meaning. And again, we can get specific just with, a recent example here in Afghanistan, the war that we just, pulled out of under Joe Biden. But who won the war in Afghanistan? Because it wasn't us, the American people. It certainly wasn't the people who live in Afghanistan that had to suffer under 20 years of failed occupation. But who won the war in Afghanistan? Private contractors, okay? The U.S. military spent $14 trillion during 2 decades of war. Those who benefited ranged from manufacturers to entrepreneurs. So again, we're conducting warfare for profit. This is our biggest industry that we have here in the United States, okay? This is blood money, all right? Let's call it what it is here. But again, that's who really won the war in Afghanistan. That's why we spent 20 years in Afghanistan. It certainly wasn't to nation build. It certainly wasn't for democratic purposes. It was for this, okay? And this is why it took so long and why it was so difficult to actually pull out of Afghanistan, all right? So this is where that money was going. But again, we can even get more specific on Afghanistan and part of the reason why it fell in the way that it did. Part of the reason why, or one of the main reasons essentially, why the Afghan government that we spent 20 years trying to build up as it was going to be its, stable long-term democracy or something like that. Basically, one of the main reasons why that project completely failed is because of the corruption that was baked into the U.S. military and the types of contracts that we were giving to the corrupt officials that we were putting in place and installing. But they say here from CNBC, 9/11 millionaires and mass corruption, how American money helped break Afghanistan. And they say in the 20 years since 9/11, the United States has spent more than $2 trillion waging war and nation building in Afghanistan. That money has helped create a tiny class of young, ultra-rich Afghans, many of whom made their fortunes as government contractors. But over time, these contracts helped fuel a system of mass corruption that engulfed the country and eventually doomed its fragile democracy, okay? Democracy, all right? This is what it looks like when you basically have the only priority of making profits from warfare and resource domination and control around the world. This is what it looks like to have a failed empire, okay? So again, circling back, credit to Katie Porter on this and calling out this corrupt official. But in the broader picture of things, okay, the reason why I spent much more time talking about these other facts and statistics that we have from this is because it's not just about this one guy, okay? Credit to her for calling him out, but it's not just his it's not just his corporation, it's not just his company, it's not just this guy as an individual, it's the entirety of the Pentagon. It is the entirety of the US military and our empire